I'm Sophie Seawright, the editor of Inside Retail. I manage the research team here, and we know from our conversations with independent retailers that creating a brand and personality for your shop is something that you'd like help with. So I'm joined by Lou Williams. She's got special expertise in helping small retailers to build that personality and to tell people about it. She's going to talk through her steps for a successful brand personality.
Branding started or originated when farmers had herds of sheep and they couldn't differentiate between cows and sheep, and so they created a branding iron and they branded the backs of each of the cows so they knew whose was whose. And that sort of morphed into developing packages with brands on them so that people could differentiate the products. And that's how we got to the word branding. So that's the history of branding. So what is a brand? It's not just a logo or an image, it's much more about the connection that you have with your customer. A brand's name will sometimes evoke an emotion, and that emotion, depending on how strong it is, will be the connection that the consumer has with that product or service. And that's what you're trying to achieve with your brand, is an emotional response, an emotional connection. It's much harder for a customer to leave your product or service if they have that emotional connection. You have to remember that your customer has a choice, and your customer will say, when they are faced with a series of options, they will say, why should I choose you? What is it that makes you better or different than the other products or services around? And so it helps you differentiate. It helps you develop a personality. It helps you charge slightly more. It helps you to add value to the product or service that you're selling. The very first starting point for a brand is to have a very clear vision about where you want your business to go. And from that vision, you need to develop a set of values. So how do you want the people in your business to behave? How do you want your business to be seen by the outside world? How do you want your customers to relate to you? Those values that you create for your brand need to be relevant to your customers. So there's quite a bit of research that you need to do, so talking to your employees inside the company, talking to your suppliers, talking to people who provide services for you, but most importantly, talking to your customers, getting inside the head of your customer, understanding what it is that they want. Once you've done those two things, then you need to think about, what is it that makes me better or different? What can I do that will differentiate myself from my competitors? What will make my customers come back and be delighted with my product or service and really wow them? So understanding that differentiation, but getting into the skin and under the skin of your customers is the most important thing you can do. Really understanding what it is they're buying from you. The really good brands become verbs eventually. So to Hoover. You can't say to Dyson, but to Hoover is a very good example, or to Blue Tack. So there are lots of examples where a brand has evolved into a verb because it has become so well known and well used. A couple of examples of really good branding. So Apple is a really good example. All the people in Apple, the employees in Apple, they behave in a particular way. So they demonstrate the values that the brand is giving out to the customers who buy the product. The design, the packaging, everything that Apple do is imbued with their values. In terms of a retailer, the one that springs to mind as a small independent retailer is a chocolate manufacturer called Montezuma. They started back in the early 2000s, opened a little shop. Well, they started out from their kitchen. They opened a little shop in Brighton, and their value was about providing good quality chocolate sourced from ethical trade and in an ethical and sustainable manner. And they've carried that through, right the way through to the 3 shops that they now own. So having a value means that customers will associate that value with you and start to become loyal to you. The highest accolade that brand can have is when you become a brand religion. And the biggest example of that is Harley-Davidson. So people who buy Harley-Davidson, it's like their religion. So that is the highest accolade, and that's where you want to be, because Your customers will be more forgiving if you make a small mistake. They will find it very difficult to move to another a competitor. The most important thing is to understand who your business is interacting with. So it might be a board of directors, it might be just employees in the shop. So you need to talk to them and say, you know, what is it that they value about what we're doing here, what we're selling, how we interact with our customers. Ask your customers, talk to your suppliers, what is it that we do as a business that you value the most, and come up with a set of values that fit your vision. So you might say, for instance, Virgin, one of their values is fun, and they try and do things in a fun and funky way, and they make sure that all of their employees demonstrate that as a value. So you need to come up with this list of values that's relevant to your customers, that's relevant to your people that you employ in your business. And my suggestion would be to make a column of each of those different types of people that you interact with the business, and then write your values down, and then say, what does that value mean to my supplier of cardboard boxes? What does that value mean, or how do I interpret that value to my customer? And you make a grid, and that will help you trying to integrate your values into the product and service that you're selling, or your retail outlet. One of the things to remember is, once you're developing your set of values, and you need to go back and check these with your customers and your employees, and remember that not all of those values will be relevant to all of the people that you interact with in your business or service. One of the most important things that you need to do is look at your competitive environment. So who are your major competitors? They might not necessarily be other flower shops if you're a flower shop. They might be the opportunity or the ability of customers to buy flowers from a supermarket. So you need to be looking at that competitive environment and noting down what each of those competitors do in terms of how do they sell their flowers, how do they deliver their flowers, and then look at the things that you do. Talk to your customers and say, what is it that you would like us to do? What would delight you if you were to make you come into my flower shop and buy a bouquet of flowers from me, rather than perhaps going online to M&S or going into a Tesco store and buying a bunch of flowers from there. So it's really important to try to get a grip on how you position your product or service in the marketplace in terms of that competitive environment. First thing is, what do I want to achieve as a business? What's my vision? Where do I want to be in the next 3 years, 10 years? What's my ultimate goal in running this as a business? The next thing I would do is then make sure you really understand your values, and we've just talked about that. The next thing is to look at your competitive environment, understand what your USP is, and start shouting about it. Tell your customers in every interaction you have with all of the people that interact with your business. Make sure that you keep telling them. So for instance, the example I would come up with is Volvo. They kept saying safety, safety, safety. So everybody associated a Volvo with a safe driving machine. That's really important. So once you've established what it is that makes you better or different, keep shouting about it, keep telling your customers, and be consistent in the way you deliver that message. Yes, it's not a retailer, unfortunately. It is an example of how values can be so well embedded within the people who work in your business. So a bunch of reporters were going around NASA being shown all the lovely rockets and the scientists, and one of them thought, I really need a story here. I'm going to nip into the loo because I've just seen a janitor go in there. So he goes into the loo and the janitor's busy washing the floor, and he says to the janitor, what do you do here? And the janitor looks at him and he says, I help to build rockets. And that's a demonstration of why values are so important, because he didn't see himself as a janitor sweeping the floor, cleaning the floor. He saw himself as being helpful towards building a rocket to go into space.
Grant Thornton are working with us here at Inside Retail on something called the Retail Growth Programme, which if you're an ambitious independent retailer and you'd like to look at how to grow your business using some of the information that we've talked about today, plus lots more of the elements to a successful business, please pop along to insideretail.com and you can learn more about how to join.